They sneered during my dismissal. We could hire 3 junior engineers for what we pay you. The meeting, ostensibly about cost-cutting, felt brutally impersonal. My name's Jason Mitchell, 58, and I'd been the lead systems engineer at Sterling Properties for 19 years. I'd single-handedly constructed their entire IT infrastructure, designed each expansion, and maintained seamless operations, so smoothly, in fact, that the executives seemingly forgot how vital I was. Until they couldn't justify my salary. Across the table sat Richard Peterson, the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer, a 6-month veteran of the company. 40 years old, sporting designer eyewear, he brandished a Cornell MBA. His modernization plan, it turned out, began with eliminating the most seasoned employees. The severance package is quite comprehensive, offered Sarah from Human Resources, pushing a file across the table. 2 months' salary plus accrued vacation. I nodded, accepted the folder, and thanked her. Richard seemed almost disappointed by my lack of protest. Perhaps he'd anticipated a heated argument or legal threats, something juicy to report to the board about my difficult demeanor. Is that all you have to say? He pressed. Most people in your position have questions, concerns, Diane added, perplexed. I shrugged, replying, seemed straightforward to me. Their bewilderment was understandable. I wasn't calm. I was simply finished. There's a crucial difference. We'd appreciate your assistance with the transition, Richard continued. The new team needs guidance on the system's architecture. Perhaps a short-term consulting arrangement? I'll consider it, I replied, already knowing my answer. We shook hands. 19 years of dedication reduced to a single cardboard box. I bid a quiet farewell to colleagues, their averted gazes betraying their apprehension. In the parking garage, my phone vibrated. A text from Michael, the database administrator I'd recruited 13 years prior. This is outrageous, Jason. The whole team's panicked. I didn't reply. At home, overlooking Lake Erie, bourbon in hand, I watched the sunset paint the water gold. Elaine, my wife, gently placed a hand on my shoulder. What now? She asked. I shrugged. Something will come along. What Richard hadn't grasped, hadn't even attempted to understand, was that I hadn't merely built their systems. I'd personally written extensive sections with minimal documentation because the company persistently refused to fund a proper documentation team. Only I possessed the knowledge of the intricate redundancies, the hidden security measures, the complex network architecture, and I had no intention of sharing it. My journey with Sterling Properties began when it was still known as Bayside Holdings, a small real estate management firm with 5 apartment buildings and a dozen employees. Their IT infrastructure consisted of 3 desktop computers, a fax machine, and a dial-up connection. Harold Bayside, the owner, poached me from a consulting role in Buffalo. We're expanding, he declared. Need someone who can build us something robust. Over 19 years, I transformed that rudimentary setup into an integrated property management system handling everything from tenant applications and background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection across 70 properties spanning 5 states. It was a piecemeal creation, constantly adapted and refined as the company expanded. When Harold retired 6 years ago, his son, Thomas, sold the company to a private equity firm that rebranded it as Sterling Properties. They initially retained me, impressed by my work, but changes gradually emerged. New executives brought new priorities. Short-term gains superseded long-term stability. My concerns first arose with the rejection of my documentation team proposal. Too costly, they'd stated. Next quarter. That quarter never arrived. Then came the consultants, young MBAs spouting buzzwords about disrupting the industry and leveraging cloud solutions. They'd sit through my architectural explanations with glazed eyes, then recommend off-the-shelf solutions incompatible with our custom infrastructure. I persistently argued against their approach, highlighting the custom code that made our system unique. Eventually, they ceased inviting me to meetings. Elaine noticed the shift before I did. They're pushing you out, she'd observed. You need to prepare. I dismissed her concerns. They need me. No one else understands the system. That might be the problem, she'd countered. 6 months prior, they'd hired Richard as CTO. He hailed from a financial software firm and immediately initiated discussions about standardization and legacy system replacement. He hired 3 junior engineers, fresh out of college, to shadow me, peppering me with questions. I answered, but I knew they weren't grasping the complexities. How could they? It had taken me years to build and understand these systems, the interdependencies, the carefully crafted redundancies ensuring smooth operation during disruptions. Richard casually mentioned a quick meeting the following morning, a quarterly check-in. I should have anticipated what was coming. 2 weeks after my termination, the first call arrived. I was updating my resume when Richard Peterson's number appeared on my caller ID. I sent it a voicemail. His message, "Jason, it's Richard. We're experiencing issues with the tenant portal. The junior team is struggling with your code. Please call back. It's a quick consultation." I deleted the message and returned to my resume. 3 more calls followed that day, each voicemail increasingly desperate. That evening, Michael texted, "Systems down all day. Maintenance requests are stalled." Richard's panicking. The next morning, Sarah from HR called. "Jason, we'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement. Temporary, to address system issues. The compensation will be very generous." I picked up. "How generous?" $350 per hour, minimum 4-hour engagement. "I'll consider it," I said before hanging up. At my kitchen table, overlooking the lake, Elaine placed coffee before me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they're discovering my true worth," I replied. Over the next 3 days, the calls escalated. Richard, Sarah, even Thomas Bayside, still on the board. The tenant portal was down. The maintenance system was malfunctioning. Automatic payments had failed, impacting thousands of residents. I remained silent. On day 4, an email arrived from Douglas Systems, a regional competitor. The message was from their director of technology, Albert Douglas. "Jason, I've heard about your situation at Sterling. We admire your work. Interested in discussing opportunities? We're upgrading our property management infrastructure." I scheduled a meeting for the next day. That evening, Richard Peterson stood on my porch, his designer glasses askew, his suit rumpled. "Jason, I apologize for this, but we have a critical situation. The entire system is down. The team is helpless. We need your help." I leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds serious." "It is. We'll offer you a substantial consulting fee. $500 an hour. Whatever it takes." I considered the cardboard box in the garage, 19 years of work condensed into a few mementos. I recalled the nothing personal, just cost-cutting line. The documentation team they'd never approved. "I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties," I said quietly. "But I have an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up," as I said. I closed the door, leaving him stunned, and resumed dinner. For the first time since my dismissal, a sense of peace, not satisfaction or vindication, but clarity, washed over me. I wasn't going to assist them in fixing their cell-made mess. The interview with Albert Douglas exceeded expectations. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Buffalo, away from our respective workplaces. "I've followed your career for years," Albert remarked. "The integrated system you built at Sterling is legendary. No one comes close." "Thank you," I replied. "It took time. That's what interests me. Time. We want to build something similar, but without starting from scratch. We need someone who understands the architecture, the integration, the security layers. Someone who can build something superior." "I'm interested," I said. "Excellent, because I'm offering you the position of Chief Systems Architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than your previous compensation at Sterling." It was an exceptional offer, almost too good. "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger, cheaper engineers." Albert laughed. "You sound like your former employer. We've tried that route. Hired 3 bright young engineers. They built something sleek and modern that crashes with over 100 simultaneous users. We need reliability, not cheap solutions." I accepted the offer. Meanwhile, Sterling's issues worsened. Michael kept me informed through occasional texts. The system was partially restored, but critical functions were failing. They'd hired an expensive consulting firm specializing in legacy system recovery. A week into my role at Douglas Systems, Richard called again. "Jason, please, this is critical. We've lost access to 3 months of payment records. Tenants are disputing charges. The consultants need your input on the database structure." I was tempted to ignore him, but something compelled me to answer. "Richard, I'm employed elsewhere now. Exclusive contract. I can't help. You'll double their fees just for 2 days of your time. It's not about money. Revenge? Enjoying our struggle? No, Richard. But you made a business decision. You deemed my experience too costly. Now you're seeing the consequences. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary, a signing bonus. A flicker of satisfaction, quickly fading. Returning would solve nothing. The same executives who deemed me dispensable would be waiting for the next cost-cutting opportunity. I appreciate the offer, but I've made a commitment to Douglas Systems. Richard's tone hardened. There could be legal ramifications if we discover you intentionally hindered maintenance. Non-compete clauses, intellectual property concerns. The threat I'd anticipated. The system was exactly as it was when the company repeatedly refused my documentation team requests. I replied calmly. Every line of code belongs to Sterling, per my contract. I've taken nothing but my experience. Feel free to contact my lawyers. I hung up, hands trembling not from fear, but from a suppressed anger. The accusation of sabotage was the ultimate insult. At Douglas Systems, I was building anew. Properly documented systems, training programs for engineers, and redundancies preventing the kind of disaster Sterling was facing. I wouldn't look back, but I wouldn't offer them assistance. Some lessons must be learned the hard way. A month later, Michael, my former database administrator, stood awkwardly in my office doorway, carrying a laptop bag. Lunch? He asked. Over sandwiches, he detailed the chaos at Sterling. It's worse than you think, he whispered. They've lost 3 years of historical data. The backups are corrupted. The consultants suggest a complete rebuild. I wasn't surprised. The backup system had multiple redundancies and security protocols requiring precise adherence. Skip one step, and the entire process would fail, designed to protect tenant data from unauthorized access. That's not all, Michael continued. I found something while assisting the consultants. Richard planned your termination for months. He'd been meeting with the board, convincing them your infrastructure was too expensive. How do you know? Michael showed me emails between Richard and the board discussing staff reduction, specifically targeting me as the first casualty. He told them they could replace me with cheaper engineers and switch to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months, projecting over $1 million in annual cost savings. I read the emails, feeling detached. One line from Richard stood out. Mitchell's systems are unnecessarily complex. He's made himself indispensable through design, not necessity. More, Michael said. The private equity firm plans to sell. They've been preparing for over a year. Richard was brought in to cut costs and boost profitability before the sale. Now it all made sense. The push for standardization, the resistance to documentation, the sudden focus on reducing senior staff costs. It wasn't about improvement. It was about preparing for a quick sale. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Michael closed his laptop. Because I quit yesterday, and I'm not alone. Half the IT department has left. The consultants estimate at least 6 months to restore full functionality, maybe longer. And Sterling's biggest client, Westwood Properties, is considering leaving. Westwood represented nearly 30% of Sterling's revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic, especially with a sale pending. What now? I asked. Michael grinned. I'm hoping Douglas Systems is hiring database administrators. That afternoon, I spoke with Albert about hiring Michael. He agreed immediately. We were building a team, with people who understood the importance of creating lasting systems. That evening, another call from Richard. His authoritative tone was gone. Jason, please. The situation is dire. Westwood is threatening to terminate their contract. The board is questioning my decisions. We need your help. Richard, I can't help you. Name your price. It's not about price. It's about respect for experience, for building things right. Silence. You knew this would happen, he finally said. You knew what would break and when. No, Richard. I knew what I built and how to maintain it. Information I tried to share many times. I ended the call, feeling neither triumph nor regret, just the quiet certainty that some lessons are learned only through failure. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 months into my role at Douglas Systems, Albert called me into his office. Just spoke with Frederick Westwood, their CEO. They're terminating their contract with Sterling next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio. Westwood managed over 11,000 units across the Northeast. It would more than double Douglas's current operations. The new system is progressing, but it's only half finished, I admitted. Albert leaned forward. What would it take to be ready, if we had to? I considered it. 3 more senior engineers, dedicated server infrastructure, and at least 9 weeks of development time. Even then, it would be tight. He's desperate. Sterling's failures are damaging their reputation. He's willing to give us 13 weeks and fund the infrastructure expansion. This was the moment. The turning point. If Douglas took on Westwood and succeeded, we'd become a major competitor. Failure could sink both companies. Let me consider the architecture, I said. I'll have a plan by tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I had a plan, ambitious but achievable. A hybrid approach to onboard Westwood's properties and phases, minimizing disruption. When I presented it to Albert, he studied it intently. Solid, he said. But you've included a substantial documentation phase. That adds 4 weeks. Non-negotiable, I replied. That's where Sterling failed. We document everything from the start. We train the team. No single points of failure. Albert nodded. I trust your judgment. Let's proceed. The following weeks were intense. We hired 6 more engineers, including 2 from Sterling. Michael built a database migration tool. I designed a modular architecture scalable to Westwood's needs. Midway through the project, an email arrived from Thomas Bayside, the former owner's son, still on Sterling's board. Jason, I apologize for how things ended. The board was misled. Richard has been dismissed. We're struggling to recover. Westwood's departure will devastate us. If you're interested in returning, the door is open. I didn't reply. 10 weeks into our 13-week timeline, we were ready for a phased rollout. Westwood's smallest region, 2,500 units in western Pennsylvania, would migrate first. Success would lead to the remaining regions. The day before the migration, Albert called me into his office. A familiar face awaited, Frederick Westwood himself. So, you're the architect? Frederick said, shaking my hand. Lawrence has told me much about you. All good, I hope. Frederick smiled. He says you've built us something that won't collapse every time we add a property. Something that will grow with us. That's the goal. I also hear you worked for Sterling. I nodded. They're in trouble. The private equity firm is trying to sell, but with Westwood leaving and their systems dysfunctional, they're struggling to find buyers. He paused. Except one. Who? I asked, suspecting the answer. Douglas Systems, Albert stated. We're considering making an offer at a substantial discount to their previous valuation. I looked between them, processing the implications. If that happens, Frederick continued, we'd need someone who understands both companies to lead the integration. Someone who can salvage what's valuable from Sterling's infrastructure while transitioning everything to your new architecture. Are you asking if I'd be willing? I clarified. Albert nodded. Only if the acquisition proceeds, and only if you're comfortable. I considered the irony. The system I built, the people I trained, the company that discarded me, potentially under my leadership. I'd be willing, I said. But on one condition, we do it right. Full documentation, proper training. No shortcuts. Agreed, Albert said. We've learned that lesson. As I walked back to my office, I felt no vindication, no desire for revenge. Just the quiet satisfaction that good work eventually speaks for itself. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what was once Sterling Properties headquarters. The sign now read, Douglas Integrated Property Management. The acquisition had been finalized for less than a quarter of Sterling's previous valuation. Albert and I walked through the office, greeting former Sterling employees who remained. Some looked away, others smiled with relief. A few, those who'd worked closely with me, nodded with understanding. Richard was gone, as was most of the executive team that had approved my termination. Thomas Bayside remained as a consultant, aiding the transition with legacy clients. In the server room, I paused. Want to go in? Albert asked. No need, I replied. We'll be migrating everything to the new infrastructure anyway. In the conference room, the remaining Sterling staff had gathered. Albert introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer. Many of you know Jason, he said. He built the original systems for nearly 2 decades. Now he'll guide us through the integration of both companies' technologies into something better than either had before. As I looked at the faces, familiar and new, I felt no desire to say, I told you so. What would be the point? I spoke briefly about the transition plan, the timeline, the support available. I emphasized that no one would be left behind due to cost cutting. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 1 year after the acquisition, Douglas Integrated Property Management had become the largest property management company in the Northeast. The migration was complete. On a crisp autumn morning, I went to the office for a final meeting with Albert. The leaves along Lake Erie were ablaze. The board approved your proposal, Albert said. The Technical Education Division will launch next quarter. You'll have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors. This had been my condition for staying after the integration. Not a higher title or more pay, but the creation of a division dedicated to training the next generation of systems engineers and architects, teaching them not just coding, but how to build lasting systems. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. No, thank you, Albert replied. What you've built here is remarkable. Not just the technology, but the culture, the documentation, the knowledge sharing, the emphasis on quality. That afternoon, I cleared out my office. This was a planned transition to my new role. As I packed, Thomas Bayside knocked. "Minute," he asked. We went to the small courtyard. "My father asked about you," Thomas said. "He's retired in Florida, but he follows company news. He was pleased to hear you were back, in a way." "How's Harold?" I asked. "Good. Fishing a lot." Thomas paused. "He always said letting you go would be the company's biggest mistake." He was right. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I learned something from all this," Thomas continued. "Value isn't always apparent until it's gone." Driving home along the lakeshore, I reflected on value, experience, careful execution, building things right the first time, and systems designed to last, and the people who build them. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply moved forward, creating something better, something that would outlast any short-sighted decision. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is to prove your worth elsewhere and let the results speak for themselves.